Welcome to Passion Universe. Today I'm joined by one of the most selfless and respected media personalities and content creators in the world, Tom Talks Rubbish. Tom, how are you?
I'm good, man. Like, I didn't expect that introduction, but wow. Like,
You
thank you. Thank
you
you. Like,
definitely deserve
wow.
it.
Thank you, man. Like, thank you for having me. Like, this is going to be a fun time, I think.
Pleasure is all mine. So if we take this all the way down to the beginning, tell me how Tom Talks Rubbish came about and the name itself, because it's very
Shh.
creative.
So, Tom Talks Rubbish came about because it was literally during. I created my YouTube channel in like 2017, but it was just going to be something that I watched stuff on. Do you know what I mean? I never wanted to create and stuff, but I wanted a cool name because just putting my shoot name seemed a bit boring. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you mean, yeah.
And my family always tell me sometimes you come out with some rubbish, but in the most positive way. So I literally was like, Tom talks rubbish. And then my actual YouTube channel came about during the stay-at-home order of the COVID-19 pandemic. Right, I was bored out of my brain, as we all were during that time.
I can imagine, yeah.
And I was like, I need something to do. I've got opinions on stuff, whether it be wrestling, etc. Let's just make videos. Like, if you watch some of those early videos back, Omar, by the way, do not, because they are bad. If you watch them back, it's like some of them are literally recorded with my shaky little iPhone or my shaky iPad, and it's just like a 10-minute movie review and things like that. So that's how the channel initially came about, my friend.
But at least you had the passion and the desire to get started. And
Mm.
you can look back at that and say, wow, I'm proud of that.
100%. Like, if I could, I don't think I'm in a place to offer advice at all. But if I was to offer like content creators any advice, it's just start. I hate to say this, but everyone's first video is going to be. mm, I don't even want to say not great, but you know what I mean, right?
Rubbish, pun intended.
Yeah. I didn't want to go there, but yeah, like everyone's first video isn't going to be great because we're not all Mr. Beast.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. So you create content about wrestling and you interview media personalities in the world of wrestling. When did your love of wrestling begin?
So, my love of wrestling itself began around. I always get the year mixed up. It's 2008, 2009, and that's around that era. My dad was a big wrestling fan in the 80s and early 90s, but missed the entire Attitude Era and sort of missed the Ruthless Aggression era due to having a life. Do you know what I mean? But my dad is also a big soccer fan or a big football fan. So every Saturday when we'd go around there, because my parents are separated, like we would, the football would be on, and after football on Sky Sports, there'd usually be either some kind of recap show from the WWE, like the Experience, or uh, um, some kind of recap show, or there'd be like a truncated version of the like that week's SmackDown or Raw. And I just remember thinking, this is so cool. Normally, it'd be, I'd see the first 10 minutes and my dad would be like, flick, because another football game was on. Do you know what I mean? So I'd see little bits and pieces there. And then around, I may butcher the year, 2009, he, I don't know what happened, but he found another way to watch football. So I was able to watch a lot more wrestling. And this was during the era of Batista, Rey Mysterio, you're supposed to be my friend. Do you remember this?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So this was the build up to, because there was a pay per view called Bragging Rights 2009, where Batista, Rey Mysterio, I think it was CM Punk, and The Undertaker was in a fatal four-way match. During that match, Rey Mysterio stopped Batista from getting the win, essentially, so he could get the win himself. And at the end of that match, I can't remember who the backstage interviewer was. You might remember Omar, but my brain doesn't work very well.
My memory is not great either.
Anyway, an interviewer comes in the ring and says to them, "Condolences on your loss, blah blah blah. Uh, uh, You'll get up next time, guys, essentially. And he gives Batista the mic. And he says to Ray, I think I'm tired of coming this close. I think I'm tired of my best friend stabbing me in the back. So essentially, that's when he then attacks. And that was it. At that point, I was hooked. I was a big Batista guy because I had DVDs of wrestling at this point, right? Where I'd started to see little bits and you could pick up DVDs at this point. And one of my treasured DVDs, the first one I ever watched, was
Yeah, great WrestleMania.
yeah, very underrated in my opinion. And Batista was on the shelf at this time with a triceps injury. I believe it was a triceps injury, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And he just does this little backstage interview. He's in like a suit and tie, and he tells Randy Orton essentially, whoever wins the world heavyweight title is just keeping it warm till I come back. And at that point, I was hooked on Batista. So seeing him again on that pay per view, I was like, "Yep, this is my guy. I like wrestling now." And that's how my love of wrestling essentially started, my friend.
How did you feel when he retired and transitioned into Hollywood?
So around 2014, I wasn't really watching wrestling because of circumstances. I was at a school, like it wasn't a residential school, but it was almost like a because I have cerebral palsy for people that may not know. It was like
We'll get into that. Yeah.
yeah, it was like wasn't like a full time boarding school, but basically 2 nights a week you could stay at the school to learn life skills, to give your parents a break, etc. So I had missed out on wrestling because I'd stay there from Monday to Wednesday, and then I'd have the Wednesday night at home, and then go back for Thursday, Friday. So I missed out on all the wrestling nights. Do you know what I mean?
So you missed out when he stopped wrestling and went into making movies.
Exactly. So at that point, I went. I think we either found Guardians on DVD at the school, or Guardian, or I think I went on a cinema trip with someone. I hadn't seen any of the publicity for Guardians because at that point I just wasn't that way inclined to look for things like that. And I was like, I don't think I swore at the time, but essentially I was like, that's Batista?
Yeah. Mhm.
And then I was just hooked from there. Any movie Batista's been in since, I've been like, yep, I'm watching that because it's got Batista in it.
It's nice to know that you maintained your fandom for him.
Oh,
Yeah.
definitely. Especially because I follow him on Instagram and things like that. And you can just tell he's a very humble dude. So that's why I really like him and things like that.
He's very inspiring as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of thing as well, especially when you know his background and
Yeah.
things like that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard you work at the cinema now.
I do.
So how is that experience for you? Do you get to watch movies early?
Not, well, sometimes, depending on the magnitude of the blockbuster, they'll say to us, look, we're doing a star showing, let's go, let's do that. If anyone that wants to come is more than welcome. Like, we had one for Guardians when it first came out, we had one for Mario when it first came out, etc. So I get to watch them for early. But I also, as part of my employee discount, shout out to Cineworld if anyone's watching, by the way, I get to go in for nothing. So, like, my ticket's free. I just have to pay for any sweets and popcorn that I want. So I go in for nothing. So I do go quite regularly.
What's your favorite movie?
Of all time?
Yep.
Oh my, that's a big question.
Asking the hard questions.
I hate to say that because if we did this podcast tomorrow, I'd probably have a different answer. Do you know what I mean?
I can imagine, yeah.
Today, I would say Men in Black. For some reason, that
Yeah.
movie speaks to me. I don't know why. I love the first Men in Black. The second one is okay. The third one is dog poo poo, but that's another story. I love the first one.
It's a classic, yeah.
Second one is really good. I do not like the third one because there's no Tommy Lee Jones in that movie. I do not like the third one, man.
It didn't live up to the hype, in my opinion.
I fully agree with you. It was one of those where you go like, you planned this, so Tommy, but basically literally, I think Tommy Lee Jones has two scenes in that movie.
Yeah, very limited.
Very, and then it's the other actor that's playing young uh, Agent K, right, in the rest of that film.
You mentioned you have a disability. Do you mind if we get into a bit of that?
100%, man. I'm an open book. You know that.
Some listeners may know, but we both have a disability,
Yeah.
uh, different disabilities, but I would like this podcast to be a safe, open space to discuss details and hopefully inspire people.
So essentially, I have hydrocephalus and cerebral palsy, right?
Yeah,
Which essentially means, as you know, Omar, because as I understand it, you have hydrocephalus as well, right?
yeah, I have spina bifida and hydrocephalus. Yeah,
That's hydrocephalus. I always say it wrong. Anyway, essentially, as you know, hydrocephalus occurs when there's a bleed on the brain and stuff like that. I had one of those at 2 days old. They can't tell us why. They don't know why. Well, they think it was because I was premature, but they don't. They can't tell us for certain. If that makes any sense. Yeah. So essentially, I have hydrocephalus and that subsequently cerebral palsy, which was caused by the bleed on the brain, because that part of my brain is now damaged, which essentially means I can't show you on camera because I cannot move with the way my setup is. But I'm a full-time wheelchair user. I I have a hoist, as you can see in the background. I have a disability shower, things like that. But I'm one of those people that thinks this is the hand I was dealt. What good can we make of it? And I try and make the best of situations.
I love that, and I can definitely identify with it. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about representation and how you
Yeah,
think your voice should be heard in the wrestling media.
yeah, definitely. So, shout out to Dom Spear, right? Who runs the Give Me a Whole Year podcast, who runs Sound Spear magazine, who runs Wobbling About and Rocking Out and Wrestle Spear. Because I feel like he is the perfect representation of what we should be in the wrestling media, right? I connected you with him when we first connected because I thought he'd be perfect because he's still building his brand, but he's built it enough to the point where people take him seriously. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, makes sense. He
So,
built a brand and a following for himself.
exactly. But he's not at the point like, and this is no knock on to anyone that is, but like he's not at the point where he's got like 200 followers and stuff like that. So the way I'll phrase it is, he's he's built his brand, but it wasn't too long ago that he still remembers how to build his brand. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think he is the perfect representation of how we should. I don't know. I don't want to say how we should be portrayed, but you know what I mean. Because like, if you look at the photos from this past weekend, which was Money in the Bank weekend in the UK, he was just hanging out with people. He was just everyone was just nice, treated him like a I don't want to say a regular human, Omar, but you know what I mean, right? Everyone treated him the same. And I feel like that's how we should be treated.
Equally, yeah.
Equally, exactly. There should be no like, oh, this guy's in a wheelchair, so follow his content just because of that. If
Yeah.
if my content was terrible, man, I wouldn't expect anyone to watch. Do you know what I mean?
Makes sense.
Just
Yeah.
because I'm in a wheelchair. Exactly.
Yeah, shout out to Dom, definitely. He's out of this world when it comes to, interviewing
Have you
people,
guys
connecting with people.
connected yet? Yeah.
Yeah, we had a few words, yeah.
Ah, amazing. Because should we tell the story of how we connected before we move on?
Yeah, definitely, go for it.
So you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Omar. You saw. Had you seen any of my work before? You watched my Muscle Man Malcolm interview, right?
Yeah, that's the first one I watched.
And you basically sent me a DM being like, "That was really good," blah blah blah. Which, ironically, I won't say this too loud. That's not an interview I'm 100% proud of because that was a. He messaged me on the day interview, and I was like, "Let's do it." That is advice I would say don't do that, by the way, because I've done that a few times. The interview doesn't turn out so great. So it's a bit like You messaged me and I was like, you was telling me your story. We was just chatting back and forth, right?
I was just lucky and glad that I found people who I can, relate to and who like the same things I like, if you know what I mean.
Definitely. I think as well, like that's the reason I connected you with Dom as well, because it was like, I'll peel the curtain back. Shall we talk about the fact that we might be launching a podcast?
Yeah, I
So,
think this is a perfect opportunity for it. So,
so Dom has always said to me, "Look, you're great at what you do with the wrestling media, but I think you could do a lot for representation, like you said, in the uh, I don't want to say disability media sphere, but I know what I mean. Do you know what I
yep.
mean when I say that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd like to do something." I've done a few interviews for his site, wobbling about and rocking out and stuff like that. But I would rather, but I wouldn't want to just do interviews all the time. I want to do something different. Like I'd had this idea for a podcast because when it was running, I was a massive fan of the FTR with Dax podcast, and essentially my idea for that was, you know how Dax would tell a story on each episode, or they'd have a guest. Like, what if we did one for disability? Like, we tell a story about what it's like going on holiday with a disability, what it's like going on a date when you've got a disability, what it's like. I
There is
can't think of other.
definitely, yeah, there is definitely an audience for it. So,
I can't think of other topics off the top of my head, but you know what I mean. Like,
just
and
daily life, yeah, daily
daily life,
life.
exactly. And Dom had said, because my initial thought was, can you just be my co? Like, can Dom just be my co-host, right? Initially, when I came up with the idea, that was my idea, and I
Yeah,
was like, he was like, no, no, I want to try and give opportunities to others in the wrestling media, and I was like, okay, I'll keep my ear to the ground on people ideas. And as soon as you messaged me and I got to know your vibe and we was just chatting, I was like, wait, this guy's looking for opportunities in content creation. He sounds perfect. And I just ran it by Dom and he was like, yeah, let's do it.
thank you, man. I appreciate that, especially because I'm only starting out at the moment and I don't have a lot of experience to show.
Well, that was my thing. It was like, Dom, so should I tell the story of how I got my first wrestling media interview?
Yeah, go for it.
So, this was around. You talk about not having any experience. So, I don't know if you've watched any of the early days of my channel or not, but I was just interviewing during the COVID-19 lockdown. I was just interviewing people that were close to me, like carers, people like that, and being like, "How did the pandemic affect you?" Essentially.
I'm actually really interested in that because since you were asking them how the pandemic affected them, how did it affect you personally? And that like gave you the idea to reach out and have opinions from other people about it.
So, if you look at the first COVID-19 lockdown, the very first one, I did not take it very well because it was my 21st birthday the week after everything got locked down, right?
Oh man.
So, my girlfriend at the time had planned everything. My mum had planned that we was going to go away and things like that. All taken away within the blink of an eye. I understand why we had to do it. Things like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Doesn't
all
make it
taken.
easier, but yeah.
Doesn't make it easier though. Exactly that. So it's like all taken up. So the first lockdown, I was a depressed mess. I was just in my pajamas all the time. I wasn't moving. I was like, I'm, I was, a, I didn't take the first lockdown very well. And then when we got let out for the first time, I was like cautious and stuff like that. And then obviously, how many lockdowns were there in total in the UK? Three.
I think three, yeah. It's a bit of a blur at the moment, but yeah.
Yeah, it is three. So three. And then, so I basically said, this time I'm not going to sit on my ass and do nothing. Do you know what I mean? I want to make something. So that's where my YouTube channel sort of started in sort of, I get the timeline mixed up and I do apologize to your viewers for that. Like sort of May, June of 2021, I started producing content. And then one night I just stuck up this video being like, if the world worked out, here's a 10 people I would love to interview. They weren't all wrestling media personalities. The majority of them were.
Do you
Do I
remember
remember?
that list?
I remember some of that list. So that was the Cultaholic crew. That was the What Culture crew. Simon Miller specifically because I didn't want to talk to him about wrestling. Chris Van Vliet, uh, Matthew from Botchamania,
Yeah.
and oddly, because he's my favorite music artist, I think Ollie Murs was my number one. Like,
Mhm.
I think that was my number one. So that night, Adam Pacitti somehow saw that interview because at the time I didn't have a lot of wrestling. I didn't have any wrestling personalities following me. Even me and Dom hadn't even connected at this point. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So he sent me a DM being like, "If you want to do it, I'll because at the time I didn't know how Zoom worked. Like I told you, I was recording off my iPad and stuff, so I didn't know how Zoom worked. I didn't know how anything worked. If you want to do it, I will record the interview for you and edit it for you." And I'm like, what is happening? Because Adam Pacitti, to me, I don't know how you feel about this, is one of the goats in wrestling media.
Yeah. Definitely
Yeah,
one of the pioneers, I would say.
one of the pioneers, definitely. So I'm like, yes, great. And I tell this story all the time. I've told this story a few times. I got given 2 dates by Adam Pacitti. The night he sent me the DM, or 2 days after. In hindsight, I should have taken the 2 days after. Because if you watch that interview back, Omar, please don't, by the way. It's one that I'm like, yeah, no, I don't like that. But anyway, uh, who I'm a fanboy. I'm interrupting him all the time. There's no structure to that interview and stuff like that. So that would be my advice for anyone that wants to get into the interview game. Research, have a structure. So like now, I don't know how much of my content you've checked out since we
Quite a
connected.
lot. Yeah.
We connected since, but I have a segment called generic questions
Yeah.
where so that, funny enough, that came about because during the Adam interview, I was asking a lot of the generic wrestling questions, and a lot of the comments were, "Great interview, but some of your questions are very generic, like the favorite match and stuff like that." And I was like,
Yeah.
instead of replying back, "Thank you, I won't do it again," it just got me thinking of like, some wrestling media personalities must get that question on Twitter all the time, right?
That is such a great mindset to have.
And I was like, you know what? I can create a spiel out of this. I can be like, for those of you that have seen my videos before, this is where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay per view, favorite wrestlers feed, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler of all time. Basically, questions that Sean Rossap, I'll use him as an example, might get asked on social media. So now he'll have a place to be like, look, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So then I'll ask favorite match of all time and stuff like that. And that's how that came about, essentially. I rambled a bit there. I do apologize.
No, that makes sense. That's a great story to tell. I'm curious. What was the first wrestling match you watched?
The first copy of uh, WrestleMania 22 I watched when I was in the hospital was Buggered. Okay? So that was, for whatever reason, like the first 3 matches of WrestleMania 22 was were broken, and the first thing I saw was Edge, the video package for Edge McFoley,
Yeah.
and so that was the first wrestling match I saw. However, my favorite match currently, and again, this is like my favorite film. You asked me this question. You asked me this question tomorrow. I could be like, no, this is my favorite match. You know what I mean?
Wrestling moves really fast, so I get it.
Exactly. Currently, I would say it's Dustin Rhodes versus Cody Rhodes from Double or Nothing 2019.
Amazing match.
Yeah.
What is it about that match that speaks to you?
And the reason that match speaks to me is because it was the first wrestling match I'd ever seen outside of WWE. Before AEW, I was strictly a WWE guy. I watched WWE. I might watch, say, a buddy sent me, here's this cool match from an indie or New Japan, but I wasn't watching anything consistently.
Yeah, it's a
Until
lot of
Double or
wrestling to watch. Yeah.
Exactly. Until Double or Nothing 2019, where I was like, okay, let's do it. Like, this is a fun show. And that got me hooked on AEW. So that's a reason. It's also because it was a match that kind of, because I used to do a podcast with Cassidy Haynes on bodyslam.net, and that was the first episode we ever did where we opt for Wrestle Watch. So that's another reason. Uh, There's a load of reasons why I like that match. That could be a whole podcast in itself. I'm not gonna lie.
Are you hoping to watch AEW at Wembley?
I know I'm hoping, but the sellout the tickets are so expensive.
Yeah,
I'll say that, and also the disabled tickets go. You know, when you go to events,
so
the
quick.
disabled
Yeah,
tickets go. You sneeze and they're gone. Essentially,
pretty much. Yeah,
yeah. Like I'll pull the curtain back. Me and my girlfriend were looking to go see Ollie Murs at Hyde Park in August. It's in August, Omar, and the disabled tickets are already gone.
madness. Honestly. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is where we're a bit like, I want to, and me and Dom have had conversations about maybe doing something so I come down with his crew and things like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah.
But I'd like to. But I did put it out into the universe because obviously after Money in the Bank, there's talks that I don't see it happening personally. There's talks that we get WrestleMania 21, 41, should I say?
Yeah.
And if that happens, you can bet your bottom dollar, my friend, I will be there.
I think everyone is going to be there. So,
Exactly.
as your channel grows, are you hoping to interview pro wrestlers in the future?
So, like, as I say, I would like to, but I like my niche of. I think if I did, I'll put it this way. I think I'd struggle. I would like to, but I think I'd struggle with that whole. You've got 10 minutes in a media scrum, because mine is more long form content, getting to know the person behind the creator or the wrestler. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Hmm.
So I'd
So if
like
you
to.
if you get the chance to get them on the channel, then you will. But
Oh, 100%. Like, does that make sense?
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So shifting gears right now, let's talk about burnout. Have you experienced burnout since you
Yep.
started?
Yep. It was towards the middle of 2022. Stupidly, I hit some ridiculous milestone, like 50 interviews within the first year and a half of my
Wow.
channel, right? I don't know how, but it happened. So in my brain, I was like, we can get to 100 by the end of the year. And yeah, nah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
I overdid it. I was overdoing things. I wasn't really spending time with family, like things like that. I was just all consumed by content creation. And then one night, I get a text from my girlfriend, and she's just like, "You realise we haven't FaceTimed in probably 3 months, right? And we used to in the evenings quite regularly. But because I'd become consumed with getting all these interviews done or prep it, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's very time consuming.
I'd forgotten what was important in some ways. So that was the moment that I was like, I need to limit it to one interview a week. Like, and whether not recording, but like I need to make sure I've got one video a week. Otherwise, my brain will go mush. And it's like I did stop. I started to not enjoy the process and things
Yeah.
like that. Do you know what I mean?
I can definitely relate to that. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I definitely have experienced burnout. I've put things in place now so that I hopefully don't again. But I think if you love what you do, there is a saying: if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. That is
Absolutely.
true. That is true. However, I think people don't realize how much work goes into content creation. Now I have, if you look at some of the more recent content, I have a freelance editor, Jeffrey Eaton, who is working for me, who takes off the big editing. So like he'll put a picture in the Zoom frame or the frame of this, being like, "This is the person's favorite match" in pictures, and I feel like I would rather work on content slower and make it be better rather than like, shit, this person mentioned what happened this week on Dynamite, so this has got to go out this week. So I always say, look, this is what happened at the time of recording, or I'll put a card in being like, this was recorded in the day after All Out, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah. There is a way to work around it. Yeah.
Exactly.
What do you like to do outside wrestling?
So, as you mentioned, I work at the cinema, and where I it sounds very bad. Where I only do that one day a week, that's like a what's the word I'm looking for? A release sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's something to do. because of the perks of the cinema. I like to go watch films. I like to watch trash TV. I like to spend time on my. I just do a lot of regular human things that some people might think, oh, that's cool. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we're getting to know the human behind Tom here. So
Exactly. I box on a Wednesday. I go to the gym quite regularly. I swim. So it's like, I just try and make sure that, because I believe, if this sounds like a hippie, but body and mind are all connected. If my body's in a good place, my
yeah,
mind's in a good place. Vice versa.
I believe that. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Are you a big boxing fan then? Do you watch it?
No, this is the thing. And this is the paradox for me. It's like, I view boxing a bit like I view content creation. Once I've done my session for the week, I put boxing away. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's something that I do for fitness, but and I like. It's weird. I like movies about boxing, like Creed and Rocky and things like that.
yeah,
But
great movies.
definitely, but I like. But for some reason, it doesn't speak to me as much as I think I'm more of a story guy. That's why I like wrestling over boxing.
Storytelling. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think we reached the closing part of this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. And
thanks for having me,
I
man.
I created a new closing tradition. You're gonna be the first guest to try it out for me. So let's see if it actually works out all right.
Okay.
If you could leave the next guest with any piece of advice, what would you say?
Oh, that's a good question. Have fun. If you're a content creator, have fun with what you do. If you're a professional athlete, make sure you're enjoying your training. If you are just a regular human, make sure you're enjoying life. Because we're a long time away on this planet. And if you're not enjoying what you're doing whilst you're on this planet, it's going to feel even longer.
Amazing advice. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, man.
Tell everyone where they can follow you and see your content.
So, you can find me on TomTalksRubbish on Twitter, where my link tree will tell you where you can find me in most places. But in case that doesn't work, because I'll be honest, I'm not very good at updating it, uh, you can find my YouTube channel, TomTalksRubbish, where, like I say, I interview some of the greats in wrestling media. I've had the likes of Sean Rossap on, Jimmy Van from Fightful. I've had a lot of the What Culture crew, a lot of the Wrestle Talk crew, a lot of the Cultaholic crew, and people like that. You can find my show on Fightful Overbooked, which is called Loving Wrestling, where essentially it's very similar to my interviews on my channel, but we talk about more the moment my guests loved wrestling. We tell their wrestling love story rather than their wrestling journey,
Yeah.
essentially. And we'll promote this. You can also find me occasionally on Wobbling About and Rocking Out, which is a disability platform for disability in the media and a mental health platform where I do interviews on there. And hopefully in the near future, mine and Omar's podcast would have launched on there as well.
Thank you everyone for listening to this episode. Don't forget to follow Tom and show him some love. Don't be afraid to send us a message and connect with us